An announcement, those of you who were inspired by Glorine Bainhart's talk last week and might wish to donate financially to hiring Mexican tutors for the project, you can see the poster on the bulletin board back here, and I think up at the, is it just back here? The bulletin board here. I know people were very touched by last week's talk, and so that's an opportunity for people. And there you'll find all the contacts you need. Next week's presentation, Opera as You Like It. I cannot read this. Ad Libitum Compañía de Ópera de Guadalajara is returning to Open Circle by popular demand. Maria de Jesus Cardenas, the soprano, Teresa Banderas, the mezzo-soprano, Jose Luis Villaro, the tenor, and Ricardo Levine, the baritone. These vocalists are at the top of their careers. They have performed at prestigious venues with major orchestras throughout Mexico, have sung a wide variety of roles, and won numerous awards. Their program for us will include arias from the operatic works of Mozart, Bizet, Bellini, and Rossini. They will be accompanied by Juan Pablo on the piano. Sounds like a really cool. Thanks, Margaret, for programming. Today's meditation will be led by Carl Holman.
Good morning, buenos dias. Do whatever you always do, get as comfortable as you can, and find your own still point. While you do, let me make this rather provocative statement from Robert Frost. Something there is that does not like the wall. And now imagine there is no country. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or to die for. And no religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. And you may say I am a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And I hope someday you will join us too. And the world will be as one. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. So let us celebrate today and tomorrow and next week and the days thereafter what bespeaks our similarities, the fact that we are all human before we are man or women, alien or citizen, black or white, Jew or Christian. And let us sing the song of dignity and respect and integrity for the family of all humanity.
Today's presentation, Abraham Lincoln and Mexico, presented by Dr. Michael Hogan. This Sunday, today, we celebrate the birthday of Abraham Lincoln with a presentation by historian educator Michael Hogan from the American School Foundation of Guadalajara. Dr. Hogan will discuss with us Lincoln's support for Mexico during his service as U.S. Congressman and as President. Dr. Hogan is a former director of Latin American initiatives for the College Board and is a special consultant to the U.S. Department of oh God. And is a special consultant to the U.S. Department of State's Office of Overseas Schools. He has also been a humanities department head for 14 years in American schools abroad. He is an active member of 3 international historical associations and has published 24 books. His best-selling Irish Soldiers in Mexico was the basis for the MGM feature film and 2 documentaries. Immediately following the talk today, he's going to be available over at Nueva Posada. You can meet him, buy and sign a book, chat, and have lunch. So please feel free, and if you don't know where it is, it's that direction, just a titch. Please welcome Dr. Michael Hogan. You on?
Good morning. Good morning. Buenos dias. I thought I'd begin this morning by, first of all, wishing Abraham Lincoln, wherever he is, a happy birthday. And also reminding us that even though he's not here, his presence is still felt in many areas of the world. And I'll explain a little more about that as I go on. Yeah? Thank you. As Kat told you in the introduction, we begin with Abraham Lincoln when he was a congressman and the Mexican War. But most of you probably don't know, because it's not widely known, that much about the Mexican War and what it was. So I'm going to take you back to the year 1845. Today, when we look at Mexico and the major cities, we say, oh, Monterrey, Guadalajara, Mexico City, maybe even Puerto Vallarta, maybe Lake Chapala. But in 1845, if you looked at the map and said you were going to Mexico, people would say, oh, where are you going? San Francisco? San Diego? El Paso? Los Angeles? Or maybe El Pueblo de Tucson? Those were major cities in Mexico then. And what happened? Well, in 1845, the new president, James K. Polk, decided that he would implement a policy that was pretty much philosophical called Manifest Destiny. Manifest Destiny was the belief that Anglo-Saxons in Estados Unidos de America were ordained by God not only to have the 13 colonies, but the entire North American continent. And circumstances proved to be very favorable for this particular philosophy. Napoleon got in trouble and actually sold Louisiana. Louisiana purchased a very large portion of the United States. We moved westward and pushed the Indians out of the way. And Polk said, well, it would be great if we could have the country from sea to shining sea. Yeah. But to do that, we need to buy California, and we need to get a land route across New Mexico and Arizona. So he approached the Mexican government, and he offered them $25 million for California and $5 million for a land route across New Mexico. And the Mexican government said, no, we're not interested in selling. So Polk said, well, I think what I'll do is I'll get an army, and I'll move the army to Corpus Christi, Texas, and put a little pressure on the Mexicans to make the deal. And so he ordered Zachary Taylor, old rough and ready, with an army to go to Corpus Christi. And there they stayed most of the winter. And the Mexicans were not impressed. So Polk said, okay, let's move the army from Corpus Christi, Texas, all the way to what is now known as Brownsville, and set up a fort called Fort Brown, right across from Matamoros. Well, the thing about that was The boundary of Texas at that time was the Rio Nueces, which is in San Antonio. Once they crossed the Rio Nueces, they were now in Mexican territory. A fight broke out, 11 US soldiers were killed. Polk declared war. And the reason for war, he said, was that American blood has been shed on American soil. In fact, however, it was Mexican soil. Abraham Lincoln was elected to the Congress in 1845, but he did not take his seat, late 1845, early 1846. He did not take his seat until actually 1847. When he read Polk's declaration of war, and he read his continuous remarks about Mexico and how Mexico had abused the goodwill of the United States, he decided to get up in Congress and make a speech. And the speech he made was called the Spot Resolution speech. And in it, he had a map. And he said, here's the Rio Nueces, up here in San Antonio, and here's where the Americans were killed on the border with Matamoros. They were obviously in Mexican territory. So the president lied as a provocation for war. Now the interesting thing about this is, I had pointed this out in 1997 in my book, The Irish Soldiers of Mexico, and everyone ignored it. As a matter of fact, the state of Texas decided that they didn't want to buy the textbook because I was too critical of Texas. And that was a major financial blow. I lost my major publisher, which at that time was the Oxford University Press, and I ended up going with the University of Guadalajara Press. So it was a financial blow. Now, all of a sudden, after the invasion of Iraq, based on false intelligence, all these historians have jumped on the bandwagon and said, oh yes, Hogan was right, yes, that did actually happen. Yeah. But the other interesting thing that happened, and this is fairly recently, was that a young woman published a book about these spot resolutions. It was called The Wicked, Wicked War. Her name is Amy Goldberg. And she said, yes, Lincoln stood up and did that. He said, show me the spot. The president's a liar, and so on and so forth. But it was obviously political. He was against the party in power. He was using his political influence to convince Congress. Yes. And I thought, honest Abe, you mean he really wasn't all that honest? You mean he was really just another politician? And then the more I researched, the more I looked at it, I thought, well, it didn't serve him very well politically. He didn't get reelected to Congress. He ran for the Senate. He didn't get reelected. He didn't get elected to the Senate either. And then he applied for a job as postmaster. And they turned him down for that. So I thought about writing a review of Amy Greenberg's book, but I don't like to write negative reviews. I'd rather not write anything at all than write a negative review, because that hurts a fellow writer. So I said, well, I'm not going to write a negative review, but I am going to kind of research that a little more, and to see what else Lincoln wrote about that time. The year is now 1913, and I'm teaching a course called APUSH, Advanced Placement U.S. History. And I have the largest APUSH class in the Americas, by the way. And my students go to see a movie called Lincoln. Yeah. Very famous. You know, it was a Steven Spielberg film. And I said, pay close attention, because I read the reviews of this film, and they say, we see Lincoln doing very courageous things for the first time. New history. And I said, I know Spielberg, and he really does take risks. So tell me when you come back from the movie what they said about Mexico. So the kids come back to class the next day. I said, okay, so what did they say about Mexico? Nothing, mister. Not a thing. I said, nothing at all? No, it's about slavery and the 13th Amendment, the Emancipation Proclamation. It was stuff that we already knew, you know, but nothing about Mexico. And I said, how odd. How odd. This is a time when a man risked his entire political career in defense of Mexico. Got up from Congress and defended it. So I began doing a little more research. And I found letters that he had written to his law partner, William Herndon. And Herndon said, Lincoln, shut up about Mexico. You made one speech, that's it. Don't make another one. But no, he wouldn't shut up. Every time Polk made a statement, Lincoln would make a statement. And then one day, they were going to honor General Zachary Taylor for being an outstanding general in the Mexican War. And Lincoln attached an amendment to the honorable statement to Zachary Taylor, saying, yes, he did a great job for us in the war, but it was an unjust war and an unconstitutional war based on a lie by a U.S. president. Oh my God! Herndon writes him back and says, no, you're ruining your entire political career. Lincoln says, if you were in my position, you would do the same thing. It is the only thing an honorable man can do in Congress, is to speak up when he sees something is wrong. So I said, there's my book. And I began writing the book. Well, the title of the book was Abraham Lincoln and the Mexican War. And along comes 1861, and then 1865, Lincoln's assassinated. And I got about 100 pages written, maybe 85 pages. And my student said to me one day, how's the book coming along? I said, I got about 85 pages, you know, and I'm kind of at an end. I mean, Lincoln's dead. And I said, 85 pages isn't a book, Doc. That's a thesis. You said you're going to write a book. What do you tell us every time we get stuck? Do more research. So I said, okay. I'm going back to Newport, Rhode Island. That's my summer home. And I'm going to stop at Brown University on my way. Because Brown University, this is an interesting story. Brown University is the home of the John Hay Library. Now, John Hay was Lincoln's private secretary. And after Lincoln died, he took all his letters, all his papers, and he offered to donate them to Harvard. And Harvard said, what do we want with that? Get it out of here. This is a bunch of boxes. We don't need that. It's a library. So John Hay took them to Providence and donated to Brown University. And Brown University was so happy to receive them that they named the library the John Hay Library, which it is today. So I go to the John Hay Library, and I say, look, I had to talk with my wife, and she said I should write this book and change it from the Abraham Lincoln and the Mexican War to Abraham Lincoln and Mexico. But to do that, I'd have to find some documents that connect Lincoln, who became president in 1861, with Benito Juarez, who became president in 1861 in Mexico. If I could find that connection, wow, that would be so great. But of course, probably someone already would have written a book if it was that easy, And the librarian says, no, I don't have anything, But she said, I have one letter, and it's from Lincoln to a person by the name of Matias Romero, who calls himself the Ambassador Extraordinario de Mexico, or Minister Extraordinario de Mexico. And I said, well, can I see that letter? She said, you can see it, but you can't copy it. You can only copy it longhand. We don't allow any of these old things to be photocopied. So I copied it out longhand. And in it, apparently, Juarez had sent Romero to Springfield, Illinois, just after Lincoln got elected. And Romero sat down with him. His son had just died, by the way, and he gave him his condolences. And Lincoln said, I've always loved Mexico and Mexican people. Anything I can do to help your country, I will do. And that was the end of that. By 1863, Lincoln's in the middle of the Civil War. The Battle of Gettysburg is going on. Meanwhile, Juarez has gone into exile because the French invaded Mexico under Napoleon III and imposed Maximilian I as emperor of the Mexican Empire. Romero goes back to Washington. He gets a rented carriage, and he goes in to see Abraham Lincoln. Well, of course, Lincoln's too busy. He's in the middle of the war. He's got Grant, he's got Sherman, he's got Sheridan. He has no time to talk. And I should explain as well what Matias Romero looks like. He's 24 years old. His president is in exile in El Paso del Norte, which is today Ciudad Juarez, working in a cigar factory. Okay? So Romero is an official nobody. He really has no title. Maximilian is the legitimate government. So he's a kind of a fake ambassador, really. He's trying to see Lincoln, and of course Lincoln has no time, and plus there's guards all around because Lincoln has been threatened with assassination already. But Mrs. Lincoln is looking for a carriage because she wants to go shopping. She loves to go shopping. She went on these extensive shopping trips. But she can't find a carriage. She asked Grant, no, Grant can't get her a carriage. She asked the Secretary of State, no, we're too busy, we don't have carriages. Matias Romero, who speaks English, comes up and says, excuse me, madam, may I offer you my rented carriage? And she says, well, yes, and who are you? I'm the ambassador extraordinary of Mexico. and you are, may I call you Madam President? Of course you can call me Madam President. Is that correct, Madam President? Well, in the United States, they say First Lady, but you can call me Madam President. They become fast friends. He spends 3 hours shopping with her. When he comes back, Lincoln is so grateful that he's more than willing to sit down and listen to what young Matias said. Young Matias' point is that this occupation of Mexico by the French Republic, by the French army, is actually a violation of the Monroe Doctrine, and that America should be as concerned as Mexico is by this violation. And Lincoln says, yes, I'm concerned. I'll express my concern in 2 ways. Number one, I won't recognize the French government. I will recognize your government in exile. That's a big one. That means he's now official, envoy. Yeah. And number two, you know that letter I gave you back in 1861? Yeah. You can use that letter any way you like. Romero takes that letter and goes to bankers in San Francisco, in New York, in Boston, in Philadelphia, and raises over $18 million in funds to support the overthrow of the French monarchy. Now, that would be a great story just by itself, but it gets better. I'm looking for more letters and more journals, but I can't find any. I'm still in contact with the librarian at Brown, and I told her, everywhere I look is a dead end. There's absolutely nothing more about this Romero character. And I found a bit about him going shopping with Mrs. Lincoln in a very rare book. She goes, you probably shouldn't be looking at books. You probably should be looking at archives in Mexico. She said, try Mexico City. And she said, if you fail there, just keep asking. Just keep asking, because there are archives all over the country. There's archives in San Luis Potosí. There's archives in Zacatecas, where it's another place that Juarez went, and also archives where the cigar factory was in El Paso del Norte. So I go to Mexico City. I explain what I want. Oh, do you have a letter from your university? Well, I'm teaching at the American school, but I get a letter from the university that I'm a legitimate investigador. Do you have a letter from the government that you're authorized to? I get all the letters. I get my wife's birth certificate, everything I need. Yeah. Finally, after all of this, she tells me, no, there are no letters from Romero. No letters from Romero here. But she said, but you know where they might be. And I said, she said, what else did Romero do? And I said, well, after he was the ambassador, he came back to Mexico when Juarez became president, and Juarez appointed him Secretary of Hacienda. She said, okay, Secretary of Hacienda is also Gobernador del Banco de Mexico. Oh. Why don't you go over to the Banco de Mexico and see what they might have? Well, I knew I was going to be in for another runaround. But there's a woman by the name of C.M. Mayo, Catherine Mayo. Some of you might know. She's a novelist. And she's written a wonderful book called The Last Prince of the Mexican Empire. I got her book on Kindle when it came out. And it had about 40 errors. Every time she used a Mexican phrase, it would do a squiggly thing. You know, and it was very annoying to read on Kindle. And it was done by a good publisher. So I wrote her a letter and I said, you know, I marked all these pages on all of these locations, LOC 5, 6, and 7. I marked all the locations where all these errors occurred. Maybe you want to get with your publisher and change it, because it's very annoying. It's going to hurt your sales. And she wrote me back and said, thank you so much. If I can ever do you a favor, let me know. Well, it turns out that C.M. Mayo is married to Augustine Carstens, who is the head of the Bank of Mexico. So I got in there, they asked me what I wanted, I explained what I wanted, and they said, yes, we have all his original diaries, his journals, his daily letters. So what a wonderful treasure trove of things. And among the treasure trove was his conversations with Ulysses S. Grant. Now, Ulysses S. Grant was a lieutenant and then a captain during the Mexican War. And he wrote in his diary, it was the most unjust war ever waged by a stronger nation against a weaker. It was, in fact, Grant wrote, a wicked, wicked war. Yeah. He even threatened to resign his commission. Yeah. But he didn't. He finished up the war and served honorably. But he had a passionate love for Mexico. When he meets with Romero, he's still practicing his Spanish. And Romero helps him with his Spanish. At one point in the coach, they're driving along, and Grant asks him, here's what I'm practicing today, Romero. See if you can help me. Ser and estar. And Romero says, go ahead. And he says, soy general del ejército norteamericano. It's very good sound. Try one with estar. Estarán los rifles en la frontera. ¿Cómo? 30,000 rifles en la frontera. The war had ended. The treaty, the Appomattox courthouse signing had taken place, and Grant had all these leftover rifles. And he gave them to Sheridan, and Sheridan took them down to the border and left them there for the Mexican troops. Yeah. With the money that Romero had raised, with the rifles that Grant and Sheridan had donated to the cause, these were repeating shot rifles, by the way, not the crappy ones that the Mexicans had had previously. He also gave them what's called the Parrott cannon. The Parrott cannon, instead of a smooth barrel, a smooth bore, has a rifle bore, which it sends the shell much more power and accuracy. And Sheridan, and this is a time when Irishmen and black people didn't get along well. And the reason for this, was, as some of you may know, is that the Irishmen were immigrants, and most of them went right into the army. And those that didn't had a struggle to keep their jobs. Whereas, and they had absolutely no interest in fighting for black people. Also, they figured that once the black people were freed, that they would compete with them for the common labor jobs. So there was no love lost between Irish laborers and blacks in this period of time. And yet, Sheridan was in command of black troops and treated them not only honorably, but particularly well. Matter of fact, when his men went into town in Texas, small town in Texas, and were attacked by locals, he defended his troops against the locals, which is kind of risky to do. So anyway, this Sheridan is putting rifles on the border. He's also helping to get soldiers who are being discharged to go into the Mexican army. Yeah. And as a matter of fact, the U.S. government thinks this is probably a good idea. If you got 180,000 black soldiers with weapons, it'd be a good idea if they went somewhere else with them. So the first major battle that they see, and they're called now the American Legion of Honor. Yeah? The first battle that they see action in is in Zacatecas, the first one, where actually Juarez is captured, and they release him from captivity and get him out of there. The second battle they see is Querétaro, in which they defeat the French, the Mexican army, with the help of the Americans. And the final one is the march, the triumphal march into, called the Death of Maximilian, and the triumphal march into Mexico City. I'm going to look at my notes because I don't know where I go from there. See what time it is. We're getting close. 5 minutes. Okay, good. So anyway, that's pretty much that. But then the question is, how come no one else came up with this before? How come there's nothing written about this before? And when I went to Michael Miller, who's in the audience somewhere, Michael Miller and Maria, thank you. I went to Michael Miller. He said, maybe we should send this book out to historians and make sure that we're not just, just being cocky. Surely out of 15,000 books about Lincoln, surely someone has come up with this before. So we sent it out to the American Historical Association. We sent it out to professors at Harvard, Oxford University, all over the world, essentially. We got back about 30, 35 responses, and they said, no, this is all new stuff to us as well. And this is a major book, not merely a reinterpretation. So a couple of takeaways, because I've only got 4 minutes left. What I think is important to take away from this, not only Lincoln's help, but and his love for the Mexican people, and also what it shows is what our nations can accomplish together when they're working together. But another one is a kind of a dismissal of the great man theory. Because without Mrs. Lincoln and her shopping trip, let's face it, folks, without this 24-year-old kid in a borrowed suit from his uncle, a 3-piece black suit, which is why I'm wearing that today in his honor, a 3-piece black suit borrowed from his uncle, and a fake title. I have a fake title too. I'm Professor Emeritus, which means absolutely nothing. It means you're retired. But without that, none of this would have happened. So, we talk a lot about leadership, and I think many, many things get done in the world, not necessarily by the leaders, but by these people who see what needs to be done and just go ahead and do it, and don't take any credit for it. And the other thing is, why have we never heard anything really good about Mary Todd Lincoln before? Well, we hear she's a neurotic, she's a shopaholic, and so on and so forth. And yet she's the one that implemented many of these policies and convinced her husband to go ahead with them. And I think one of the reasons is there were no female historians in the 19th century. And in the 20th and 21st century, when women began to write about other women, they chose the great woman theory. Right? We're going to write about Katie Stanton. We're going to write about Susan B. Anthony. We're going to write about Clara Barton. We're not going to write about some first lady that was a fashion nut. So even women have their prejudices when they choose what other women to write about. So I think that's another takeaway from this. And finally, my little note at the end is that so much can be accomplished when we all work together. When we realize that a strong and prosperous Mexico is to our advantage as Americans and Canadians, and that by sharing this history, we can help ensure that future generations are more respectful and more understanding of our mutual cultures and our histories. And a couple of people I'd like to thank here before I open the floor up for questions. Margaret Von Avery for inviting me, Carlos Gonzalez Magallon and his wife for being here, and for also helping to promote the book in the United States at all the Consul General's offices, and also with the ambassadors. Alex Grattan, where are you, Alex? Who's been a supporter of this history for, 20 years? When did we meet? 1997? A long time. Mark Scones for his great review just the other day by Mark. Michael Forbes, and I don't know if he's not here, from the Colony Reporter. And I'm going to open the floor up for questions right now. Yeah?
Oh, wow. Okay, so I assume there's going to be a lot of questions. I'd like them to be questions, please. He has such a wealth of knowledge, obviously. Less opinions and perspectives, more questions, and we'll start here in the back, and then we'll come up here.
First of all, I want to thank you for a wonderful presentation, and I have read that Lincoln and Juarez also communicated quite a bit by telegraph, which was new. Does the research support that?
No, it doesn't, and I was hoping that it would as well, because I heard that story, but no, they didn't. Yeah, I was going to say something about, this was a very modern time. We think of 1845, we think, oh my God, that's ages and ages ago, but the telegraph had been invented. As a matter of fact, the Mexican War was the first war with war correspondents who communicated to their various countries within 24 hours of a battle happening. That was major. Another thing that was major was the sewing machine was invented. Singer Sewing Machine Company came up in 1865. And the fourth thing that's interesting, the typewriter was also invented. And the first desertions of the Irish soldiers were noted on typewriters. So I have all those records, and for the first time we see typewritten records, 1846, 47. So that's kind of interesting.
Yes, thank you. This is actually not a question.
Well, I'm going to give you liberty.
It's a comment that I want Michael to comment on. First of all, I hope everyone has read the book. If not, then I will talk very briefly about 1847, what the Niños Héroes. You heard about the Niños Héroes? All right. What was very important to me after reading the book is that in 1947, Harry Truman went to the monument to the Niños Héroes. And if you heard about the Niños Héroes, they died fighting against U.S. troops, right, in Chapala. And why do I bring that on? Because it's very important. Actually, Harry Truman went on to make a very strong statement about the relationship between Mexico and the U.S., that it's not shaken by those awful things that happen between our countries, but on the contrary, that we've come along, we've developed strong ties, and need I say that this is very, very important at this particular moment to remember how important it is for Mexico, the U.S., and vice versa. A comment on, please.
Thank you, Ambassador. Yes, as far as we know, Harry Truman was the only U.S. president that actually apologized for the invasion, and actually laid a wreath at the tomb of the Niños Héroes in Mexico City.
In the back here.
Yes. Given Lincoln's support of Mexico against the French, were there any repercussions from the French?
Yeah, that was why Lincoln was so reluctant to step forward and give physical aid. He did a lot of, I'll wink at that, I won't see that. The other thing was that Seward, his Secretary of State, was reluctant to do anything that would offend the French because he was afraid the Confederates and the French might join together and defeat the Union. So it wasn't until the actual signing of the surrender at Appomattox Courthouse that the aid became active, that we lost the rifles and those kinds of things. And much of that occurred during the Johnson administration, because Lincoln was assassinated shortly thereafter. So much of the actual physical aid occurred during the Johnson administration, but following through on what Lincoln's legacy was. Yeah.
Here. You, Carl.
You mentioned the battles of Zacatecas and Querétaro. I wondered why you didn't mention Puebla with that, because it's not very much celebrated in the Cinco de Mayo. It's not celebrated much in Mexico.
That's a good question.
But it is with the another defeat, and then Maximilian was executed.
That's a good question. Okay, the Battle of Puebla took place several years earlier. Now remember what happened was the French were defeated at the Battle of Puebla. Okay, but now we're talking about 1863. The French, as soon as they were defeated, immediately got more troops in. Not only more French troops, but also Austrian troops, and defeated the Mexicans again. So there's an expression in Mexico: "No festejar antes de la victoria." But unfortunately, The interesting thing that happened as a result, though, is a young captain by the name of Porfirio Diaz became very, very famous as a result of that battle. And he was a general by the time the war ended in 1867. And actually, part of the choque that led to, this is interesting, I don't want to get off on the tangent, but it's really interesting to me. Part of the choque that occurred between Juarez and Diaz was Juarez liked gringos a lot, you know. He also liked the money that gringos had and the investments that they had, and he wanted to encourage that as much as he could. But he was only a general. Juarez was the president. And Juarez in 1867 wanted everyone to see this as a Mexican victory, and solidifying this as a Mexican victory, and getting you know, Mexican unity and Mexican nationality back, bringing the conservatives and the liberals together. So when Diaz proposed, yeah, let's get a medal for the Legion of Honor, and let's have, he goes, no, if you want to do that, have a private ceremony, but don't give the gringos credit for this. This is not the time for that. And also, Romero had all his documents, all his journals and stuff. Let's put these in the National Archives. No, let's put them in the Banco de Mexico. Yeah. So, yeah.
Back here.
I just started your book yesterday, and you mentioned this earlier, and I read this part, and it sounds like when Lincoln was elected to Congress, it was quite an extended time before he took his seat.
Yes.
Why was that?
That's just the way things were in those days, and I think it had to do with transportation, because it took a while to get where you were going. You know. Yeah, it was almost a year before he actually took his seat in Congress, and that's why some people are critical. Well, if he was against the war so much, why didn't he say so at the time the war broke out? Why did he wait a year? You know. Well, there are a number of reasons. Number one is he had no official position, but number two, the real tragedy of the war, the real horrors of the war, did not really occur until the invasion of Veracruz. The invasion of Veracruz, we bombarded Veracruz for days and days and days and killed thousands of civilians. And that was when everyone was pretty sickened by it, you know. And everyone was saying, let's see if we can stop this before it gets too bloody.
Back in the back.
This is maybe peripheral to your main topic, but could you say something about the participation of many Union and Confederate officers in the Mexican-American War and how that might have affected the outcome of the Civil War?
Yeah, that's a good question, actually. That's a whole nother book. Almost every famous general in the U.S. Civil War got his training in Mexico. Grant, of course, we know. Robert E. Lee was an engineer and probably the most brilliant. He's the one that's mentioned most in all the reports. Robert E. Lee, for example, was responsible for the taking of several important positions by getting them scouted out, by drawing maps of them. In one case, the Battle of Cerro Gordo, the Mexicans held the pass and they held the high ground. And it was almost impossible for the troops to pass through without getting annihilated. And what Lee did is he had someone scout out the area, and they determined that there was a sheer cliff on one side of this Cerro Gordo. And he said, okay, dismantle a mountain howitzer, take the pinions from the carriage, and use the pinions to get up the side, and then make a pulley and get the howitzer up the side of the mountain. And when they did, they had a howitzer up above the Mexicans and were able to take the pass. I don't know how many of you know Mexico City, but outside Mexico City is an area, there's a shopping center now called the Pedregal. But the Pedregal is essentially a large flat area of, well, not really flat, but a large area of lava. And the lava stones are very smooth and slick. And when the Americans invaded, they invaded Mexico from the south, not from the north. They went around Mexico City and came up from the south. But from the south is where the Pedregal is. And it was August 20th. It was a rainy night. Yeah, you know, I mean, talk about your leg. You know. I mean, you're going to go through a Pedregal at night with horses and cannons. How are you going to do that? So they sent General Lee to scout it out, and he took 30 men with him, and he said, there's a way. Came back the same night. He left at like 10 o'clock, comes back about 12, and leaves again at 2 in the morning, and got up behind the Mexican army outside of Churubusco. So he did like incredible things as an engineer, and incredibly brave things as well as an officer. So he's mentioned in almost all the reports.
Thank you, everyone. Please join.